Am I good to go? I'd like to welcome you all to another installment of our Tuesday Tour series. My name is Kyle Sandler, and I'm the Education Coordinator for the Enfield Shaker Museum. Today I'm going to be talking about shaker attics. The word attic is really interesting. It dates back over 1,000 years. It comes from the Greek region of Attica, and it originally referred to a small column or a section of a low facade. The way we think of attics, though, in our houses today really comes from the 17th and 18th centuries, where it is a space just below the roof, above the top level of the building. What makes shaker attics so interesting is that, unlike our homes that maybe have 4, 5, maybe 6 people, shaker buildings had 20, 30, 40, 50, sometimes even 100, like in the Greystone dwelling. And so shakers had to adapt their attics as storage space, and how they did this was adding in things like built-in cabinetry, retiring rooms, and walk-in closets. And so today for this Tuesday tour, we're going to look at a bunch of different attic spaces at the Enfield Shaker Museum. We're going to start with some of the more simplistic attics, and then we're going to move to the most complex attic, which is in the Greystone dwelling itself. So I hope you'll continue with us on this tour.
Now,
welcome back to our Tuesday tour. Now we're in the Brethren's East Shop. This building was constructed in 1819. It was originally used as one of the early schoolrooms for the village, and it eventually is going to become a tailoring workshop for the brothers in the community. This building is really interesting in that it was actually moved to this location in 1834, and this attic that we're in right now bears signs of that shift. And so if you look at the timbers here, if you look at them closely, you can see how timbers were added on and boards were sistered in over time to raise the pitch of this roof and make the much larger space we're in right now. Because the Brethren's East Shop was used as a work building, this was a rougher space up here, used for things like storage. If anything, this is an attic. This is more typical of the kind of attics we think of in our house. This unfinished space that can be used to store goods that are not being used at the time, or leftover reminders of the past. One other thing that's interesting about the Brethren's East Shop is this building was dramatically altered in the post-Shaker era and has been restored back to the look it would have had in 1880. And one thing that's really important when we do historic preservation work at Enfield Shaker Museum are architectural fragments. So spread all along the floor here, we have different pieces of architectural fragments from this building. And these fragments tell us a lot about things like trim, the peg rail, the sheathing the building would have had, and even built-ins, which sometimes are possible to reconstruct, which is really fascinating. So we get a better look of the inside of this building. Unfortunately, these architectural fragments are so important because we don't have photographic insight or photographic knowledge into this structure. And so this attic, again, is very typical of a standard attic. This is a centered chimney federal style shaker building. And if you just look back this way, you can see those 2 centered chimneys. The space is fairly dark up here, but you do have great access to light on the east and west ends of the building through these 6/6 windows that you can see down the end there. We're currently in the laundry building at the Enfield Shaker Museum. Laundry is a really interesting structure. We're in the oldest part of the building, which dates to 1813. That makes this the oldest space at the grounds. And what we're going to be looking at is the dairy attic. Behind me you see this wall of built-in drawers and cabinets, and you see this door right here. And it sort of looks like it would be maybe a closet door possibly. But instead it's something unique. It's a pass-through door. And so if you were to open this, instead of having a closet behind here, you have access to the dairy attic next door to the laundry. And the dairy attic's a really interesting space. One of the most fascinating parts about it is that it's very functional. It's not necessarily for storage. The attic of the dairy is designed to help ventilate some of the heat produced during the dairy production process. And so in just a second, I'm going to walk up here and show you the inside of this really interesting attic space, including the green paint on the inside of the cupola. Okay, so now we're going to be entering the attic of the dairy. So we're going to go up the small staircase here.
and then pass through this tiny little door, and you enter this really interesting space. The walls are curved, and then they square off, and then if you look up here, you can see the inside of the cupola, which is one of the most interesting spaces in this building. This cupola would have been used to vent some of the heat from below, and what I really like is the inside of these green shutters that form the actual structure of the walls of the cupola. Farther up, you can see just a little bit here of a three-paned window. Now we're going to move on to another space in the laundry dairy. Now we're in the attic of the laundry building. This is in a section that dates from 1833. And this space is really interesting because you can get a good look at the framing of the structure. If we look up right now, you can see what is the five-sided ridgepole that holds up the roofline of the building. And what's interesting about this five-sided ridgepole is it's very similar to the one that gets put into the Greystone dwelling a little bit later. And this one's actually accessible, so you get a really good look at the length of this space through here. The other thing that's really fascinating, so these rafters here are mortise and tenon in, and what's unique is the pegs actually crisscross. So they're pegged into place, and the pegs actually crisscross each other, which makes this kind of an interesting framing flourish. Another detail here that's interesting is, and it's a little hard to see in this dark environment here, but these rafters here are actually chamfered. Some are chamfered on two sides, some are just chamfered on one side. And so that's just one more design flourish that the Shakers used in the framing of this building. Welcome back. We're now on the 5th floor of the Greystone dwelling, and it's part of the 2-floor attics on 5th and 6th floors of this building. The 5th floor is a really fascinating space. It was set up to have 2 retiring rooms on either end, so 2 for the brothers and 2 for the sisters, and then there were also built-in walk-in closets. But right now we're in one of these retiring rooms, one of the sisters' retiring rooms, and on the wall behind me you have this large row of built-ins. And the built-ins in these retiring rooms are all on one side of the room because the walls in the 5th floor are a lot thinner than they are on the lower levels in the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th floor retiring rooms. These drawers are quite large. They would have been used for storage by the people in the room. Though there's some question as to whether these rooms were ever used, were ever inhabited. There's one account from the late 1860s that talks about how these rooms may not have had people living in them at the time. So there's a little bit of question on this. It would be really fascinating to find an account that actually documents which rooms in the Greystone dwelling were used and in what period they were used in. But if we go back to these built-ins for a second, one thing that's really interesting to point out is the drawers do have locks on them. Not all of them. And the locks tend to be randomly placed. So there's a little bit of a mystery as to why these drawers are where they were and what would have been stored in them. To give you an idea of the size of the drawers on the 5th floor of the Greystone dwelling, they're quite large. They're dovetailed drawers, and they have a nice chamfer on the bottom. And so, what were they used for? Possibly clothing, if these rooms were used, or other dry goods and items in the house. One other interesting feature of the 5th floor retiring rooms are these closet doors. And so it appears as if maybe it's a regular closet. But if you were to open it up, just like this, you're able to actually step in here, and you have this sort of private set-off space. There's 3 rows of peg rails that run the entire length of the building just inside here. And if you look inside, you'll see that the walls are finished in the raw plaster that you would have had throughout the Greystone dwelling. So this is a partially finished space. And so whether this was just additional storage for the Shakers living in these rooms or for the village, we unfortunately may never know. Now we're in one of the walk-in closets on the 5th floor of the Greystone dwelling. These were large spaces that were used by both the Shaker sisters and the brethren in the community in order to store clothes, particularly off-season clothing. And if you look on the wall next to me, you can see the remnants of 3 rows of peg rail that originally rounded the entire room. So you would have had a raw plaster wall, and then you would have had white peg rail. Unfortunately, this peg rail that you see right here, this section, these are actually what we call the ground. So peg rail is a two-part system. You have the ground, and then you have another more decorative piece that fits on top. But we can still see signs of where the pegs were located and where the rail itself was located on the wall. Just a little bit up here, you can see one of the examples of interior windows. There's plenty of interior windows on the 5th floor of the Greystone dwelling. These would have been used to bring light into these fairly dark closet spaces. It would have also been a way to discourage people from bringing open flames, which were prohibited by the Shakers' community rules. We're now on the 6th floor of the Greystone dwelling. And this is an interesting space up here. So the 6th floor of the Greystone dwelling comprises 3 spaces. You have 2 garret rooms, one on the sister side, one on the brother's room, and then in the middle you have the bell tower, which we'll just visit in a minute. This space is interesting. It's quite a lot of square footage, and its actual use is a little bit of a mystery. Whether these spaces were used for storage or workspace we don't totally know. We're always looking for manuscript material. Unfortunately, spaces like this often just don't get mentioned. One interesting feature in here, though, as you scan along the wall, are some additional interior windows. And these interior windows serve a particular purpose, and that is to allow light into the area behind the room in the eaves of the roof. In just a second, when we move to the bell tower, I'm going to show you a door that allows you to get access behind these walls, where you potentially could store additional goods or do interior repairs on the roof line, so that you wouldn't have to set up some kind of scaffolding system to get up there. Now, if you look over here for just a second, like other spaces in the Greystone dwelling, we would have had built-in shutters in these rooms as well. Today, this room gives you a wonderful view of the west side of the Shaker property. Welcome to our final stop on this Tuesday tour of Shaker Attics. We're now in the bell tower of the Greystone dwelling at the center of the 6th floor. And this is a really interesting space. If you look up, you can see some of the wooden framing. And you can see this staircase that actually goes up to the cupola of the building where the bell is housed. One really interesting feature is the staircases and the railings really change once you get to this floor. And one really interesting detail on this newel post is right down here. This newel post shows us details that we also find on Enfield furniture. And so that's something common when we look throughout this building. We often will find architectural details that do get translated into the material culture of the Enfield Shaker Village. One other interesting detail up here is that we saw those walk-in closets below, but lighting is definitely a challenge in those spaces. And so in the floor here, you can see in this little alcove, it's boarded up right now, but you can see this window that's propped up. This window will actually be inset into the floor, and there was another one on the other side as well. And basically these windows allow additional light into those closet spaces below us. To add to the light bring in this space, there's 2 very large windows that bring additional lighting into this space and illuminate the staircase in the center of the building. Another feature that we have in the Greystone dwelling bell tower is this door right here. There's another one that is just out of view right now, but this door allows you to have access to just below the ridgeline of the roof. So if you have a troublesome leak, for instance, this might have been a space where you could get access to do that kind of work. And in that sense, the attic in this Shaker building is very flexible to the needs of the community. Thank you for taking the time to join us for this Tuesday tour. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact the museum. We look forward to welcoming you back when it is safe. Stay safe, stay well.